Okay, so tonight, Bezras Hashem, we're going to continue with our series of Shirim on entering the Sea of Wisdom on the weekly Torah of the Goyen and the Tzaddik, Rav Yitzchak Maya Morgenstern Shlita. And what we're going to be focusing on is a Maimer HaShoiche Nitam that was given over in Parshas B'chukosai Tovshin Ayin Daled. It was a shir that was given over on the Zohar HaKadosh that they've been printing recently with different titles, and it's clear, I'm not sure who wrote them up, but it's clear that they were written in more of an extensive mimer, as if it was one kind of fluid way of teaching them al derech ha'avoda, and so it's a very pleasant and wonderful way to read the Rebbe's teachings. And the idea that we're going to be discussing is really not dissimilar to what we spoke about last week with regards to what Katnas HaMoichin is. And what we had spoken about is how Katnas HaMoichin in truth is a form of Moichin. It's an experience of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. That there's no moment in this world that is not a totality in and of itself. And therefore, if I find myself in a state of smallness, so I am existing within the totality of that particular point of smallness, which contains within it all of the possible moments and experiences of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. It just happens to manifest by way of Katnas. And so it's not a difference in kind. It's not different than Moichin the Godless. It's not a separate existence from Moichin the Godless. It's a difference in degree. It's a difference in how I experience this moment. But the moment of Katnas, the moment of smallness and forlornness and unconsciousness, when it comes to spiritual avodah, there's no opportunity that is devoid of all opportunities. It's just a question of how willing I am to be Moser Nefesh, to believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is found everywhere. And in this week's Maimer, what we're going to be focusing on is the process. What are some of the tools that a person can utilize in order to engage with Katnus? Okay, so we know that the first postulate is that even when I find myself in Katnus, based on the Taras Chocham, based on the Tzaddikim, based on the Rebbe's Mahalach, so Katnus is a Shleimus HaMoichin, it's a full expression of divine consciousness and an opportunity to connect. It just happens to be by way of Katnus. Now we have to see what it means to be mitmoded, to confront Katnus. So the Rebbe says as follows: Adam nimsa kol hazman ba'olamus. Person finds themselves in particular moments of spiritual stations, different worlds, different experiences. Adam nimsa b'kfar shel goyim. A person finds themselves in a foreign space of others. Margish kasha gam gashnius v'gam beruchnius margish klipos. He finds it difficult when it comes to physicality. He finds that when it comes to spirituality, things are impure and unholy. Bishvil Shashami Yisharbe Averos V'Klipos, because that space that a person finds themselves in is filled with transgressions and concealing elements that blot out the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But it's also true that a person can find themselves in the Beis HaMedrash as well. But if they engaged in a certain type of transgression, or there's some sort of difficult thought that I'm dealing with, it's as if I find myself in the tanner shop, removed completely from holiness. B'kfar shel goyim, in a place removed from kedusha. What is a person meant to do at that moment? Davar Rishon, says the Rebbe, the first thing that a person has to do, the first thing is that it is forbidden for a person to disconnect themselves from the tree of life. A person has to understand and have emunah that the Shechina HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence in concealment is with a person perpetually in every moment. This is not a simple thing. This is a profoundly deep idea to contemplate. Person has to understand and know intuitively that the Shechina HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence is everywhere. And a person has good feelings and a person has bad feelings, a good mood and a bad mood. That in concealment, even within the bad mood, even within that concealment of my experience, there's godliness permeating all things. And I have to transform every feeling into an opportunity to take pleasure in Avodas Hashem. You find yourself feeling a feeling of concealment. Who said that God doesn't reveal himself in concealment? HaKadosh Baruch Hu miskala gam b'toiv v'gam b'helem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals himself in good and in concealment. Afal pi HaKadosh Baruch Hu wrote setov. Nevertheless, HaKadosh Baruch Hu desires good. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to find him in good places. Toiv Hashem l'chol v'racham b'val kol masav. We know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is good to everybody and that there's compassion for everybody. So theoretically, ideally, I shouldn't find myself in a state of concealment. In truth, in the concealed elements, in the unconscious of every moment, there's absolutely nothing that is removed from HaKadosh Baruch Hu's light. That the Shekhinah HaKadosha is with you, is by you, and near you at every moment. Once a person contemplates that, once a person learns to find that within the concealment, it's okay, I'm okay, Hashem is still here with me, the next step is to try and elevate myself out of that situation. Because the awareness that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is found everywhere, even in the smallness, cannot become a reason that I stop trying to escape the smallness. What it is the precondition to escaping the smallness. Because if I think that God is not found in the smallness and I'm trying to escape the smallness, it's going to be a traumatic response to an emptiness that I feel God is devoid of. But when I recognize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in that smallness, then I have the strength to properly try and extricate myself and untether myself and elevate myself from the bottom to the top, b'derech HaKadusha. So then a person has to draw the Torah into that moment. Then a person has to begin to contemplate the thoughts of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in that place. And this is the secret of the 42-letter name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of Ana B'Koyach, which is always about the engine that moves from within concealment and ascends upwards. It starts in the darkness and it moves upwards to the light, unlike the 72-letter name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which descends from the light into the darkness. So once I acknowledge that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is here in the darkness with me, so then I utilize the names and the tefillos that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives me in order to escape from the darkness. And that name that is always associated with aliyah, with an ascension from a difficult descent into concealment, is the Shem Mem Beis. Ana B'Koach, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, please give me the strength. Give me the strength. I need the strength to ascend from concealment into revelation. And a person has to begin to ascend from the darkness that they find themselves in, because in truth, that darkness is an Ak and an Abiyah Shalim. It has an Adam Kadmon, an Atzilus, a Briya, Yitzira, Nasiya. It's a sum totality. It's a fractal that contains all possibilities of expression within it. So there's going to be gradations within this moment of fallenness. And I have to begin to slowly but surely elevate myself out of the smallness to the worlds of fixing within that moment of smallness. Because every moment contains the all. And even though, yes, in truth, this place is godly, God is found everywhere, in spite of the fact that we might not be learning Torah, in spite of the fact that we might not be attentive to the divine presence there. What do I need to come on to learning Torah? What do I have to elevate myself if I come to recognize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is there surrounding this place, even in concealment? So then that's a revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So why would I need to learn Torah then? Nevertheless, nevertheless, the goal is to ascend out of that place where all I know is the simple truth of God's presence in all moments, and ascend out of the world of Asiya, out of that lower space of concealment, up into the world of Yetzira, and higher and higher. And in parentheses, it says, and I have to move from that general principle that God is everywhere to believing practically and specifically that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is here, which is the darg of Mamala Kalaman, that there's differentiation, and that I do have to ascend from that concealment into stages of clarification. But before I begin with the gradations of growth in terms of spirituality, but before I begin this progression and ascension upwards through the stations of clarifying the darkness and revealing HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the first postulation, the first acceptance in my mind has to be that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is everywhere, even in the Tzimtzum. Hashem is as if it was before the Tzimtzum, even in the Tzimtzum. And all concealment is only from the perspective of our human condition. But from the position, so to speak, of divine awareness, of the Das Elyon, there's no distinction. Everything is filled with the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Rebbe continues, if a person doesn't feel good, a person doesn't feel connected, a person finds themselves in a state of lowly consciousness, At that point, instead of saying, I don't feel good, I'm not connected to Kedusha, say, I don't feel good, and that is the experience of being in the world of Asiya. My spiritual experience right now is an experience of not feeling good. And if it's really bad and really schwer, then it's as if I'm at the bottom of Asiya, but I'm still within the worlds of holiness. And then I have to elevate myself into the worlds of Asiya and holiness through the act of Kabbalah Malchus Shemayim, to simply accept upon myself the spiritual practices that I decide to do in my life. And afterwards a person goes up to the world of Yetzira, Derech Shem Beis, to the 42-letter name of Hashem, Ki Adua, as it's known that Sham, the Rebbe Nechunya ben Akana, should be Yetzira Lizchos, the Madrega Ava V'yira, Shu Keneged Matzira. And then I move from that feeling of not so good feelings in terms of my relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and I ascend into that place of emotions of Ava and Yira, or the memory of Ava, or the memory of Yira, which correspond to the Chagas. Then I ascend into the world of Bria, of contemplation. And then I ascend to the world of Atzilus through the 42-letter name of Atzilus, which is the simplicity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's names, until I begin to feel the tree of life again. So the goal is to acknowledge the difficulty, but be aware that there are gradations within the difficulty, and that there's no moment in my life that is not filled with all 4 or 5 layers of experience. And it's not enough to just accept that on a base level, God is found everywhere. I have to then go into the process of ascending, of moving out of that katnus, not to tolerate the katnus or to stick around in the katnus or to celebrate the katnus, but to force the katnus to become the site of transformation where I ascend and elevate into a space of godless. But before I attempt to make any spiritual jump or leap, what I have to know is b'chol makom yesh ilan hachayim. In every place that I find myself, the tree of life is there. Gam b'makom hachoshech, even in the place of darkness. Gam ba'amad desveika be'etz hadas tovera, even in the world of doubts, which is the world of the tree of das tovera. Shesham ne'echaz hamaves, where death is found. Gedichsiv, like it's written, Gam choshech lo yashrich mincha, that even darkness is not dark to you. Chol matom sarich le'esboinin belikus. In every place I have to contemplate the divine presence. Because in truth, the name of Havai is found everywhere with the proper nikudim. And those nikudim, when I express it, I'm revealing to myself that I have the capacity to uncover the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in every moment. And what the Rebbe is pointing out here is a profound process of accepting the difficulty, of being aware that the difficulty is not in opposition to Avodas Hashem, but rather the difficulty is a new expression of Avodas Hashem. And there are ways and mechanisms through which I clarify the difficulty. I clarify the levels of not feeling good. I ascend out of my stuckness with the desire to move closer and closer to the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And all of that is built upon the basic recognition that there is no moment that is devoid of the fullness of all of the worlds. As Mamela, when I find myself in a state of loneliness, or lowly consciousness, I can't ever say that this moment is not enough for the service of God, because in that moment, the Shekhinah is there, the Eitz HaChaim is there, everything is there. There's an Olamos ad Ein Sof in that moment. And when a person decides their willingness to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Katnus as well, instead of just chilling in a space of, oh, Hashem is everywhere, I know this, I can just tolerate the Katnus, that's the first step. But what I have to focus on then is how to extricate myself and untether myself, because the acceptance of the infinite presence of godliness in all things is ultimately for the purpose of then engaging in the process of tshuva. Once I ascertain the ever-present, never not present infinitude of godly presence, the Shekhinah HaKadosh, which is found everywhere, the next step is to then take those moichin and begin to grow with them, because that's the energy I need to grow. But if I simply rest and abide in that absolute truth that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is everywhere, then sure, I'm recognizing that the Katnus is also HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but I'm not giving myself the ability to be metakin zayin, to fix things, to elevate, to bring the world back to its source, Be'ezras Hashem.